I want to start with a topic about the cell membrane. Cell membrane is a very amazing organization, and by itself, and it has a very unique structure. It's liquid. The cell membrane is liquid, but constructed as strong as a wall, and it is wide. It's very big for its structure, like an ocean, but it is very thin, like 7.5 or 10 nanometers. You know that nanometer is a billionth of a meter. It is very thin then. When you compare it with an apple, if you consider the apple's inside as the inside of the cell, then the membrane is the apple's peel. But it is thinner than the apple's peel, and it is wide and very well authorized. And
Actually, we can consider this with an example. For example, it is so thin that to obtain the thickness of a piece of paper, we have to put over and over more than 10,000 cell membranes, and it is amazing, mashallah.
MashaAllah, yes, it is very amazing. And first of all, when you think about the structure of the cell membrane, it is also very amazing. First of all, it is the defense of the cell. Because it protects the shape of the cell, because it surrounds the cell and avoids the causal molecules to get inside of the cell. And if a molecule wants to enter inside the cell, then it has to show a ticket to the guardians positioned on the cell membrane. And but we are talking about a liquid structure actually, and a liquid structure that can decide and protect the cell. It can protect the cell by giving a decision, by avoiding the causal molecules to enter inside the cell. But of course, it is not the wisdom of the cell membrane, it is the wisdom of Allah, mashallah. And secondly, it is a very vital component of the communication, because it is the open window of the cell to the outer world. For example, the messengers deliver a message to the cell membrane. There are some of the couriers on the cell wall, and the message comes to the cell wall, and then these couriers take the message and deliver it inside of the cell, because they are positioned on the cell wall. And these couriers are actually proteins, and also the guardians are also proteins. I will talk about them a little bit later. And thirdly, it is flexible. And for example, it has an ability to both getting food inside of the cell and dumping out the waste materials. And as a result, to get the food inside of the cell and dump the wastes outside of the cell, it changes its shape and returns to its original without having any damage. And the structure of the cell membrane is called fluid mosaic model. And it has been discovered by some of the scientists in 1970s, and but it has been created for the very first moment that the cell has been created, the cell membrane. But the scientists can only understand it in 1970s, its structure. And it contains fats, carbohydrates and proteins, as we said, the guardians, and also the couriers. They are the proteins. And there are some special antennae on the membrane. They are the sugar molecules. And we will talk about it. First of all, I want to talk about the structure of the fats. The fats are very special. There are three types of fats: phospholipids, cholesterols, and glycolipids. Phospholipids are very special because they are the basic material of the membrane. They have a special structure. When we look at the chemical structure of the phospholipids, we see that it has a head and a tail. The head part likes the water. I will say why it's important. And the tail part doesn't like the water. What I mean by this, the cell is something full of water. It is liquid, you know. And the outside of the environment, it is also liquid. It's water. And water intends to move from one place to another according to the concentration. And the inside of the cells are very concentrated because they are containing too much protein. But outside of the cell generally don't contain that much protein or other organic materials. So if the membrane is not fat structured, the water could travel from outside to the inside very easily, and this may cause the burst of the cell. But fat is a very special molecule. Fat avoids water to move from one direction to the other direction freely. Actually, it can move, but it depends on the structure of the cell. Cell has a intention to consider about it. And it is very special because when you look at the phospholipid molecules, you see them like two bilayers. And one of them on the top, the ones with the heads, the ones that like the water. In the middle, you see the tails, they don't like water. And at the bottom, again, there are heads that like the water. They are two bilayers of phospholipids. And inside is water, outside is water. And there are too many lipid molecules with very different structures. And how could it be possible just the ones that are required, that the phospholipids have the position on the cell membrane? This is something very amazing. And also the tails are very important because the tails, it has a special length range. And if it is longer, the carbon molecules on the tail is longer, it makes the membrane very rigid. But if it is shorter, then it disperses. So it cannot make the structure correctly. And it is a liquid, the membrane is a liquid, but a very strong wall, a very strong structure. And as we said, there are two more different lipids. One of them is the cholesterol, the other one is the glycolipids. The cholesterol molecules are very important because they control the fluidity of the membrane. And glycolipids, the glucose molecules on the lipids, are the ones that have the property to have like an antenna, a receiver. They can detect if there is another cell around. They can understand if there is a messenger around. They can understand many things. They are like the antennas.
And I want to add something. The length of the tails are also very important for one more reason. Only phospholipids with proper length can be in a liquid state in our body temperature. So it is very important and that this is like this, and it is obvious that it was created by Allah.
Yes. Mashallah, yes. If these molecules were not positioned with other molecules, then there cannot be some liquid considered of the membrane. It might be rigid, it can be dispersed, but it is very special. All the molecules, their chemical structures, their positions, their carbon number, everything is very special. Their ion charges, they are all created perfectly to make the membrane, actually. And as I said about the guardians on the cell membrane, and also the special structures that the cell membrane can take the food to inside or release the waste materials outside of the cell. And these are for scientifically named, if we say, endocytosis and exocytosis. And at this point, the proteins come on the stage. Some proteins pass the membrane from one side to the other. As we said, it is like a two bilayer of phospholipids. There are some special proteins pass this membrane. They are transmembrane proteins, they are called. These proteins are very special because they are traveling like icebergs in the sea, in the cell membrane, because the fats are liquid and the proteins can travel inside these liquid structure. And there are some also sugar molecules. There can be some sugar molecules on these proteins. Also, they can help recognition. And there are some proteins, they are small, just on the one side of the membrane, maybe on the bottom or maybe on the top. The ones on the bottom are the ones that the couriers that deliver the message from outside to the inside. They also involved in the structure.
These proteins, leukocyte cells, can distinguish the body's own cells and foreign bodies like viruses and the bacteria.
Yes, mashallah.
Mashallah.
And cell membrane has an ideal purpose, directed structure. There is nothing random. And no known substance can replace it. They cannot imitate it correctly because it has some special, all the organic molecules on it has consciousness, it seems like.
Yes.
They can decide, they can understand, they can have some judgments, they can let some proteins or organic molecules to pass inside the cell, or they don't let them pass inside the cell. And as Michael Behe, one of the biochemists, says, cells are simply too complex to be evolved randomly. And it is clear that there is no evolution when we consider about the cell membrane. It is impossible to be evolved because
Yes.
it is very complex and it has a structure very unique. It cannot even be imitated. They cannot even make a fake cell membrane. And it is very clear that, it is very obvious that random things, coincidences cannot make fat molecules, proteins, and all the sugars come together and make this perfect structure. It is impossible. It is very clear that every atom in these molecules, every molecule in the cell membrane, everything together, they are working in an harmony and they are very great, perfectly created. Because if there is a problem, we see that the cells cannot survive. Cells die. And cell cannot feed. Cells cannot dump out the waste material. Cells cannot have the answers, cannot deliver the messages, cannot understand, recognize anything. So it causes the death of the cell. But there are 100 trillion cells in our body, and when we look at our body, everything is working perfect. And the cell membrane always has its system, always has its structure perfectly. This is because of creation, because Allah holds every molecule working. MashaAllah.
Dolunay, while you are explaining the cell membrane, you said that the fats, these contents are separating two different contents from one another. And why does a content like fat decide to be a wall? And how can be a structure decide this kinds of a thing? It is obvious that this is the, mashallah, miraculous creation of Allah. In one of the cell membrane, in each one of us, for the billions of people in the earth, every cell membrane in all these kinds of fats having the same mission and doing it from the moment that Allah has created them, mashallah.
Yes,
MashaAllah.
mashallah. We are talking about a liquid wall
Yes.
that has some iceberg-like gates, and also we are talking about some molecules that have consciousness, and they are so thin that they are just 7.5 or 10 billionth of a meter, nanometer size, and it has a consciousness. How could it be possible
It's
by
impossible.
randomness?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, it is obvious creation, mashallah.
Mashallah.
MashaAllah.